Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
When I was 12, my dad actually had intercourse with me, of course against my will. It was basically rape. It wasn't violent, but it was rape. And he told my mother about it the next day because he felt so guilty. He told my mother about it. And she had been gone from home, and when she came home, he told her. And her way of dealing with it was to come to me and ask me if I had ever allowed any of my brothers to do anything like that to me. My name is Charlene and this is my story.
Talk a little bit about growing up. What was growing up like?
I was born and raised in western New York State to a farming family. My grandfather, my dad, my grandfather's father and grandfather before him were all dairy farmers, and that is the life I grew up in. We originally lived in my hometown of Cattaraugus, New York, and we lived on a farm down the road from my grandparents, and my dad and grandpa farmed together about 3,000 acres. That was a lot of work, and us kids pitched in and did our share of it. I was on a hay wagon throwing hay bales at 10 years old. I had 5 siblings. I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and I was the 4th of 6 children. I had some difficult time growing up. My aunt told me later in life that my mom, I was the 4th baby in 4 years. I was preemie, and my next older brother was only 11 months old. And my aunt told me my mom just kind of fell apart because she was so overwhelmed. And I guess they used to call it a nervous breakdown. But she had a very difficult time even caring for me, and a good portion of the time left it to an older relative. That began a long history of, she had 6 children, but I was the one who was abused. She criticized me constantly. When she got angry, she would attack me physically with whatever she had in her hand. She focused all of her frustration and anger on me, and I've had to work hard for forgiveness. And my late husband really helped me with that I had to let go and I had to forgive if I wanted to have any quality of life, because by harboring unforgiveness, I was the one that was being harmed. At the same time, my dad was a pedophile, and I was his favorite toy. And from what the psychiatrist and I can determine, it started when I was probably 2 years old, and it went on until I went to live with my grandparents at the age of 16. I lived with my grandparents for a year back in New York and helped Grandma keep house. She was ill. She passed away during that school year, and I had to come back to Ohio. But I believe God allowed me to have that year there with my grandparents to show me what life could be like compared to the hell that I lived in at home. My parents lied to me and forced me to go back to Ohio and told me I could go back in the fall to finish school. in Cattaraugus. But after I got home, my mother said to me, "We have no intention of letting you go back." This is the kind of example of the way she treated me regularly. She treated me like I was a slave. She even hired me out to friends to do cleaning and stuff for them, and she got the money. I didn't even know until afterwards that they were paying for my work, because somehow I never did good enough. But she never taught me how to do stuff. She yelled at me a lot about not doing things properly, but she didn't teach me how to do things. That's pretty much the story of my childhood. When I was 12, my dad actually had intercourse with me, of course against my will. It was basically rape. It wasn't violent, but it was rape. And he told my mother about it the next day because he felt so guilty. He told my mother about it, and she had been gone from home, and when she came home, he told her. And her way of dealing with it was to come to me and ask me if I had ever allowed any of my brothers to do anything like that to me. From that time forward, I was the family whore. My mother told friends, ladies at church and friends, horrible stories about me. She continued that kind of attitude right up until the time she died, because I was her only support system late in life. After my dad passed away, I was the only child who did things with her or for her for years, and yet I would take her to my friends' homes, and they would welcome her and treat her nicely. And then when she had the opportunity and I wasn't in the room, she would say vicious, awful things about me to them. It was like a habit that she never could let go of. So I've had a lot to struggle with when it comes to forgiveness. My dad, after I went back to Ohio, after I had spent the year in New York, my dad never laid another hand on me again. I think he must have been afraid that I had been strengthened and emboldened, that I wouldn't sit back and take it anymore, I think was probably his thinking. When you look at families that are troubled, like mine obviously was, it's a generational thing. My one nephew went on to molest one of my nieces, and we actually had to call in the authorities and stuff. And my parents' response to that was, my dad was terrified. I believe that my dad probably molested her also, but nobody was going to discuss that. And my dad tried to molest my daughter, and I told my siblings, do not leave your children alone at mom and dad's house, because mom will not watch them. But most of my siblings didn't believe me. There was a double standard in my family. The men were everything. If you were a male, you were everything. Us girls were there to be servants. A direct illustration of that is if we were going to have dinner, sitting in the TV room watching TV, each one of us girls had to fix a plate for one of the brothers and serve them before we could get our own food and sit down and watch TV. I was always made to feel like a second-class citizen or less. I grew up, I was no more prepared when I left home, left my parents' home at 18 and a half and came to Ohio to stay with a brother and his wife. I was no more prepared to be an adult and live an adult-type life than I was to play a concerto blindfolded on a musical instrument or something, because I had not been taught any real life skills. I married. I've been divorced 3 times, married 4 times. I lost my last husband to death in November of 2019.
So, just going back to what you said about your dad, do you know if he was a Christian? Because I know you said you were a Christian.
He was a Christian. I mean, my family firmly believes he went to heaven. I don't know, you know. He never asked me for forgiveness. My brother confronted him. He never owned up to, well, he might have owned up to some of it. My younger brother, the attitude I had for my siblings was, well, my mother claimed when I was 26 and I was in therapy, my parents were living in Nebraska and my mother came to Ohio for a visit. My therapist asked me to bring her with me to a therapy session, and she told my mom about the sexual abuse. And my mom acted all shocked and dismayed and went back to Nebraska and started divorce proceedings against my dad. It was a long, bitter, acrimonious process, and 6 months after the divorce was final, they remarried. In the meantime, my siblings basically had the attitude that if Char had just kept her mouth shut, that wouldn't have happened. My mother kind of ingrained in my family this idea that I was the family Judas goat, that everything that goes wrong could get blamed on me. But my mom was very seriously damaged emotionally. Her parents divorced in the 1940s, late 30s or early 40s, when people did not divorce. My grandpa was a Baptist minister. So I can only presume that the wrongdoing was on the part of my mother's mother, my grandma, because she, I guess, remarried shortly after the divorce. He was very harsh and abusive, at least to my mother, according to him. And my mother was actually taken into foster care in her teens and lived in several foster homes where she claimed that she was sexually molested and stuff. And her attitude was, I endured it, you can endure it, was what she actually said to me one time. But she was a very damaged person, and as I became an adult, I had to learn, I had to remember that. People were amazed that I tried to maintain any kind of relationship with my parents. And I said, well, they are my parents, you know, and the Bible says to honor your father and mother. And that's why I believe that I really, really struggled with depression. I was told by a psychologist about 20 years ago that I had a form of PTSD going way back to early childhood because of all the abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual, and that I would always probably need some sort of medication to help me get through. That cloud of depression that I felt like always followed me around was gone. That in being willing to forgive and let go, that God released me from that depression, and that a lot of that was being caused by me hanging on to anger and bitterness and hurt.
So do you remember when the depression started?
Well, no, I don't remember specifically, because I mean, I was always being beaten down emotionally and physically by my mother. Like, I remember one time she had a big stick. We were herding cows into the barn, and she didn't think I did something properly, and she threw this great big huge stick at me. That was just an example. And like, I can remember writing letters to my grandparents and putting them in the mailbox on the way to the school bus. She would see that the flag was up on the mailbox indicating that there was mail for the postman, and she would take, and when she'd see it was me writing, she would take that letter and open it and read it, and then call me into her sitting room after I got done school and criticize what I said and rip me up one side and down the other. I love to write poetry. She criticized that. I love to sing. She criticized the way I sang. It wasn't until I took private voice lessons when I was living with my grandparents when I was 16, my junior year in high school. I had private voice lessons, and after that, she was proud to hear me sing. But she was just such a dichotomy of opinions and whatever, and I just felt like, I spent the whole time growing up trying to please her and couldn't, and I spent many, many years of my life being a people pleaser because I was still looking for that approval. And I learned that I have to please God, and I have to be happy with myself, and everything else falls into place.
So with everything that went on with you growing up, how did you get into relationships? Like, what was that like if you got into a relationship? Did you take it with you, or?
Yes, I did. I guess I just never thought that I was really deserving, and I invariably picked men who were worse off than me, because I guess I thought if I pick someone who's in worse shape than I am, I can make him better, and then maybe I'll feel better too. And that didn't work. I had 3 divorces. By the time I was 50, I'd had 3 divorces. My children each have a different father. My first marriage was very tumultuous. He was physically abusive and a serial cheater, adulterer. My second husband was a good man, and then my third husband, I was with him less than 2 years, and I said, I can't live like this. And when he came and I told him, I want to separate, we'll do 6 months separation and see how it goes before we get divorced. And he would come to me and beg me to take him back and say, I know you gave your first husband more chances, and I know you gave your second husband more chances. Why can't you me? And I'm like, well, I was young and stupid then. I'm older now, and I'm tired of the crap, and I'm not going to live with it anymore. So, and then I was single for 10 or so years before I met my late husband, John.
My next question is, so growing up, you said, I know you grew up as a Christian. Was that something that always followed you, or did you? Yes.
My parents were very damaged people, but they always believed in God, and they took us, we went to church, and my mom had an amazing faith. When she, like I said, she was a very damaged person, but she did believe very strongly in God. She believed in tithing and gave when it was painful to give to the church. She was very intelligent. She had a near genius IQ, but because of all the things that had happened to her and she was so damaged, she never really accomplished anything in her life except raising her kids. Some sort of counseling, some sort of support group, a Bible study group, an older woman at your church who you can talk to, and you can, by all means, go see a counselor, a clinical psychologist, or a clinical social worker. I went through therapy when I was in my 20s, and I also went to AA, and it saved my life. I was married to an alcoholic, my first husband, and my way of coping with his alcoholism was to drink with him, so maybe he wouldn't. I would go drink with him because otherwise he was drinking with other women. So it was, yeah, it was a mess.
So with everything that you've been through, do you think you suffer from anything like ADHD?
I do have ADHD.
Okay.
I've had to learn to adjust with that also. I was on medication for it for a short time, and it has cost me a couple jobs. But you just pick yourself up and keep going. And if you have ADHD or you suspect that you do, there again, find some professional help. Find ways to cope with it, ways to do things that circumvent the problem.